When a powerful HOA president and her country club cronies took over my ranch for their lavish summer soiree, they crossed a line no landowner should tolerate. They bulldozed my legal notices, set up Bison burger grills next to my cattle pasture, and threatened to evict me from my own property. But Thunder, my 2,000-pound bull, had the final say that day. What sacred lines do you protect when everything you've built in 30 years is at stake? My name is Frank Garrison. 30 years ago, I invested my entire life savings in 15 acres of pristine country just outside Riverdale. Back then, there were rolling hills, clear skies, and nothing but empty land for miles. I built my own ranch, overlooking a natural spring that provided the sweetest water you've ever tasted. After 4 decades working with cattle across the Midwest, when I finally had my own place, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The American bison are the national mammal, majestic creatures that roamed these plains by the millions before we nearly wiped them out. I started with 3 calves and slowly built up a small conservation herd. Thunder, my prized bull, was born right here on this land, 2,000 pounds of pure dignity, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the plains. For nearly 20 years, life was perfect. I woke up at dawn, tended my bison, and enjoyed the simple pleasures of ranch life. No neighbors, no complaints, no problems, just me, my animals, and acres of freedom stretching to the horizon. My dream of retirement came true through decades of hard work. Then the developers came. They bought the adjacent land and divided it into whispering meadows, identical mansions on quarter-acre lots with pretentious names like the Wellington and the Cambridge. City dwellers moved in, who thought country living meant having a slightly bigger backyard and being able to grow tomatoes in raised beds, while still expecting all the amenities of suburban living. Almost immediately, they established an HOA with a rulebook thicker than the family Bible I inherited from my grandfather. At first they kept to themselves, enforcing their own ridiculous rules about mailbox height and approved shutter colors. I barely paid attention. After all, my property wasn't part of their development. I'd been there long before they arrived. That changed when Margaret Wellington moved from Connecticut and ran for HOA president. She had East Coast money and privilege oozing from every pore, the kind of woman who had never had a callus on her hands a day in her life, but spoke with authority about proper land management to a man who had been working the land since before she was born. The first time we met, she looked at my old ranch house and my worn Carhartt jacket as if I were a historical actor, not a man on his own property. Her Mercedes gleamed in my driveway like an alien spaceship that had landed in the wrong century. She wore designer jeans and a crisp white blouse, the kind of ranch chic you see in fashion magazines, but never on an actual ranch. "Mr. Garrison," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we're delighted to have such rustic charm adjacent to our community. Although I wonder if you've considered how your activities affect our property values. Perhaps a consultation with our approved landscapers might be beneficial." I remember thinking as I watched her drive away that day, how strange it was that some people could look at a piece of land and see nothing but dollar signs. Soon the letters started coming. The first complained about my split-rail fence not being aesthetically compatible with community standards. I called the HOA office and patiently explained that my property was not under their jurisdiction. The secretary looked embarrassed, but said she'd make a note. I figured that would be the end of it. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, citing concerns about agricultural uses in the adjacent residential area. This time, it was signed by Margaret herself, with a pointed reference to some county ordinance that, when I actually looked into it, had nothing to do with my situation. It had been repealed 15 years earlier. When the complaints about my bison started, I decided to attend an HOA meeting. I figured if I explained it directly, the rational people would prevail. At 62, I had learned that most conflicts can be resolved with honest conversation and mutual respect. Oh, how wrong I was. I walked into their clubhouse, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, wearing clean jeans and my best dress shirt. You would have thought I had wandered in from another planet. Their heads turned as if I had brought a pile of manure to my boots. Margaret stood at the podium with a PowerPoint slide labeled "Enforcing Community Standards," showing an image of my fence circled in red with the caption, dangers adjacent to our community. These animals, she said, clicking on a close-up of thunder, are dangerous. They belong in a zoo. I stood there. I raise American bison for conservation, and this is private property outside your jurisdiction. Margaret smirked. Mr. Garrison, your layout may have been acceptable at one time, but our community has moved on. After the meeting, Dave Jenkins, a nice man who lived on the edge of the development, pulled me aside in the parking lot. He had moved in 6 months ago after retiring from a manufacturing job in Cincinnati. Frank, you should know that they have discussed ways to force you out. Margaret's husband golf with the county commissioner every Sunday, and they're exploring options to challenge his zoning. What they're doing is wrong. The next day, I found a copy of their meeting minutes in my mailbox with several sections marked, explore nuisance ordinances, investigate watershed regulations for livestock near natural springs, and most disturbingly, request potential easement for community access road. Someone at that meeting backed me up, but it was clear that I was under siege right at home. Spring turned to early summer, and I'd almost forgotten about the HOA nonsense when I got their glossy community newsletter in my mailbox. I usually toss them straight into the recycling bin, but the front page headline caught my eye: Summer Celebration, Community Barbecue. Below was a map showing the event location in my back pasture, not adjacent, not nearby, but above it. I thought it must be a typo until I saw a small note that read, "Special thanks to the county commissioners for allowing us temporary use of the adjacent scenic property." They had drawn their event boundaries to include 3 of my best acres, including the natural spring. The next day, a certified letter arrived. It was printed on heavy cardstock with gold embossing and an official-looking seal. It stated that my back pasture was being temporarily taken for community enhancement purposes under some obscure county ordinance. The letter was signed by Margaret and had the county seal at the bottom that looked suspiciously new. I immediately called my attorney, Ben Harrison, who had handled my affairs for decades. He had helped me buy the property and knew every legal detail of my ownership. "They can't do this, Frank," he assured me after reviewing the document. "This is private property, plain and simple. That county seal looks official, but I checked, there is no ordinance that allows this. It's either a mistake or a deliberate fraud." Ben sent an official cease and desist letter via courier. A week passed with no response. He sent another letter, this time copying the county commissioners and threatening legal action, but still nothing but silence. Meanwhile, I found out they were selling tickets to the event, $75 per person or $125 per couple, advertising an authentic farm experience and exclusive access to pristine rural scenery. Their website showed a telephoto lens photo of my property from the Whispering Meadow side, including close-ups of the creek and my bison. "Enjoy farm-to-table dining featuring locally sourced delicacies," the description read, next to a photo of a bison burger topped with artisanal cheese. My blood ran cold. They were planning to serve bison within sight of my cattle. The callousness stunned me. I drove to the county office to file a complaint. The clerk at the planning department, a woman who had worked there for decades and had handled my original property documents, looked concerned when I mentioned the Whispering Meadows Homeowners Association. "Mr. Garrison," she whispered, glancing at her coworker, Ms. Wellington's husband, plays golf with Commissioner Davis every Sunday. "They're looking into your complaint," but she slid a note across the counter with "Nothing will happen before July 15th" written on it, the date of their planned event. She quickly crumpled it up after I finished reading it. I began putting up no trespassing and private property signs along my property lines. The next morning, they were gone, replaced by event parking arrows pointing down my access road. This wasn't just about a party anymore. This was about whether I had any rights to my own land. 2 weeks before their planned grand banquet, I woke up at dawn to the sound of a diesel engine. Looking out my bedroom window, I saw 3 large trucks parked on my access road and a group of workers unloading equipment. The invasion had begun. I got dressed and stepped outside. Workers in matching polo shirts bearing the Whispering Meadows logo were marking out areas with flags and stakes in the meadow behind me. One was testing soil samples near my stream, another was taking measurements for what looked like a makeshift stage. What the hell do you think you're doing? I asked the foreman, a burly guy with a clipboard who barely raised his head as I approached. Setting up for the Whispering Meadows summer celebration, he replied as casually as if I'd asked about the weather. We're marking out areas for tents, stages, and facilities. The restrooms go through there, and the VIP area will be near that water feature. This is private property. You're all trespassing, I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger rising inside me. He shrugged. Look, I'm just going where the work order says. Talk to the woman in charge. He pointed to the edge of the property, where a black SUV had just stopped. It was Margaret, dressed in white linen pants and a silk blouse. She was directing another group of workers who were dismantling what looked like a portable toilet. She was pointing and making notes on her clipboard like a general planning an invasion. Her husband stood beside her, talking on the phone, ignoring the natural beauty around him, while he ordered someone through a property list. Margaret, I said, as calmly as I could, this is illegal. You have no right to be on my property, let alone set up for an event. She barely glanced at me. Mr. Garrison, this event is for the greater good of our community. The county has granted us temporary use while your objection is being processed. She put quotation marks in the air around the word objection, as if my legal rights were just an annoyance that needed to be brushed aside. That's not how the law works, and you know it. That's how things work in the real world, she said with a dismissive wave. This community needs a cultural boost, and this event will showcase the potential of this backward area. We're inviting a famous chef from Chicago, and the lieutenant governor will be in attendance. Progress will happen, Mr. Garrison, whether dinosaurs like you participate or not. Just then, I noticed a truck pull up with a large banner. Workers opened it, revealing authentic bison burgers, a taste of the Wild West, complete with a cartoon bison wearing a cowboy hat. They were planning to set it up across from my bison pasture. You're planning to serve bison meat right in front of my cattle? I couldn't believe the cruelty and insensitivity. Margaret finally turned to face me, her patience clearly running out. They're just animals, Mr. Garrison. They don't know the difference, and frankly, neither do most of the people here. Without our guidance, when was the last time this land contributed anything to the cultural fabric of the area? I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the sheriff. This ends now. Go ahead, she said with a smirk. Sheriff Collins and his wife have VIP tickets to our event. I'm sure he will take your concerns very seriously. His re-election campaign received a significant donation from our community fund last month. When I contacted the sheriff's office, I was told that they could not intervene in a civil matter without clear evidence of trespassing. Apparently, my word was not enough to counter the HOA's claims of temporary county approval. The deputy suggested that I file another complaint with the county. The roundabout way was designed to stall for time until their event. Later that day, I overheard two workers discussing how the HOA had been telling people that I was mentally unstable and opposed to community values, painting me as some kind of antisocial outcast who was standing in the way of progress. According to them, I was just a crazy old man talking to his bison and refusing to accept the changing times. As I walked back to my house, I noticed that they had moved the east fence my property line to within 10 feet. They were actually redrawing my property line while officials looked the other way. Something had to be done. That evening, I sat on the porch with Jim Reynolds, my ranch manager, who has worked with me for 15 years. A Vietnam veteran with a calm demeanor and unwavering loyalty. Jim understands what it means to stand your ground. We watched the sunset over my land, now dotted with stakes, flags, and even a few portable toilets they've installed. We could leave for the weekend, Jim suggests, sipping his beer. Let them have their party, then sue them for everything they've got. My cousin's a good lawyer in Kansas City. I shake my head. If we leave, we're surrendering. Next up, they'll be having yoga and wine tastings here. This isn't just about a party. This is about my right to my own property. This is about 30 years of building something meaningful. Jim nods slowly. So what's the plan, boss? I'll go with you, whatever you decide. Just say the word. We stayed up late at night examining the layout of my property by lantern light. I knew every inch of it, the small elevation changes, the natural paths, and most importantly, the movable fencing system I used to move my bison through different grazing areas. We had developed a system over the years that allowed me to create corridors and paths to move my herd without stressing them. We need to be smart about this, I told Jim. No one is getting hurt, no people, no animals. But they need to understand that actions have consequences. I'm not going to be bullied off the land I've poured my life into. We walked around the property by moonlight, identifying strategic spots where we could create paths with our fencing system. We were careful to clear away anything that might pose a hazard if people needed to move quickly. This wasn't about revenge, it was about holding my ground. If we adjust the east side here, Jim said, pointing to a gentle slope and opening the connecting gate near the stream, we'll create a natural path right to their main staging area, and Thunder always leads the herd down that path when we open it. I added, seeing the plan taking shape. It's his favorite grazing spot. Around midnight, there was a knock on my door. It was Dave Jenkins from the edge of Whispering Meadows, looking around nervously as if afraid of being seen at my house. Frank, I think you should know that they're expecting over 300 people on Saturday. Margaret invited the county commissioner, several state representatives, and even a reporter from a regional lifestyle magazine. She called it her signature accomplishment as HOA president and a model for community outreach initiatives. Thanks for the tip, Dave. There's more, he said, lowering his voice. They've hired security, off-duty bouncers from the downtown nightclub. They're supposed to handle you if you cause any trouble. And Margaret has told everyone that you're dangerous and unpredictable. She's hoping you'll do something that gives them grounds to file a restraining order against you while you're on her property during the event. Dave handed me a printed copy of the event schedule. They're planning on serving bison burgers at exactly 12:30, right after Margaret's welcoming speech. It's being built as the highlight of the event. After Dave left, I stepped outside to check on my herd of bison. Thunder, impressive as ever, approached the fence as I approached. The moonlight cast a silvery light over his massive form. I'd raised him since he was a calf, and despite his intimidating size, he had a gentle temperament, unless something threatened his herd. We had a connection that city folk like Margaret would never understand. Just follow your instincts tomorrow, old friend, I said softly, handing him an apple from my pocket. Nothing fancy, just be yourself. As I walked back into the house, I realized something important. I wasn't just defending my property rights. I was standing up for a way of life that was disappearing across America, swallowed up by developments and HOAs that tried to sanitize and standardize everything they touched. If I gave in now, I would be disappointing more than just myself. Saturday morning dawned bright and warm, perfect weather for an outdoor event. I woke before dawn to make final adjustments to our plans. Jim arrived early, and we ate breakfast in silence, both of us understanding the gravity of the day ahead. By 9 a.m., the first luxury SUVs and European sports cars began to arrive, parking along my driveway. Men in pastel shorts and women in designer sundresses began strolling through my pasture like they owned it. I noticed a few of them stopping to take selfies with my bison herd in the background, completely oblivious to the irony of what was on the lunch menu. White uniformed waiters bustled around the elegant tables, a string quartet set up near the natural spring that was the centerpiece of my property. Huge barbecue grills were burning, sending the scent of charcoal into the air. A bison burger station was being assembled, complete with gourmet toppings and a carved board where a chef in a tall white hat was preparing to demonstrate his cutting technique. Near the spring, I spotted two burly men in tight black polo shirts with earpieces, the security team Margaret had hired. They watched me carefully as I moved around my own property, speaking into their wrist microphones whenever I changed positions. From my porch, I saw Margaret presiding near the makeshift stage they had set up. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a floral dress that probably cost more than my monthly expenses. A banner behind her read, "Whispering Meadows Summer Celebration, Raising Community Standards." Her husband stood nearby, chatting with men in blazers and loafers, including the county commissioner. At exactly 11 a.m., Margaret stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. The crowd of about 250, all dressed as if they were attending the Kentucky Derby, fell silent. "Welcome, friends, and neighbors to our first annual summer celebration, her voice echoed across my land. Today, we celebrate the growth of our community and our shared vision for the future. This beautiful setting, she waved widely, is our community's shared treasure. I caught Jim's eye across the meadow. He nodded briefly, then walked casually toward the east fence just as we had planned. We are especially pleased to welcome Commissioner Davis and Representative Wilson, who helped us secure this site for today's festivities, Margaret continued, pointing to two uncomfortable-looking men in blazers. And a special thank you to our generous sponsors who made this day possible. And that was it. I walked calmly through the crowd, people parting with curious glances, a few whispering as I passed. I recognized a few familiar faces from the town, people who had known me for years, but now averted their gaze, caught between Margaret's social pressures and their own sense of right and wrong. I reached the stage just as Margaret was describing the day's activities, emphasizing the authentic Bison burger experience as the culinary highlight. "Excuse me," I said, my voice echoing across the suddenly silent crowd. "I'd like to say a few words." Margaret's smile turned strained. "Mr. Garrison, it's nice to have you join us. Perhaps you'd like to say hello?" I faced the crowd. "This is private property. You're all trespassing. I've asked politely, I've sent legal notices, and I've been ignored. I'm giving you one last chance to move this event elsewhere." Margaret laughed nervously. "Oh, Mr. Garrison, and his strange rural concerns, always so dramatic." She turned to me, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "Get off my stage before the guards drag you away. It's time you accepted that progress is coming, whether you like it or not. This land is worth 10 times more as an extension of our community than it is as your personal zoo." I noticed her guards moving toward the stage, hands on their belts, where I suspected they carried tasers or pepper spray. I nodded slowly, then turned and walked away. As I passed Jim, who was standing by the east fence, I gave him the signal we had agreed upon. "Time to go," was all I said. Jim casually walked to the far east pasture and opened a particular section of portable fencing. He then strolled to the west edge and did the same. To anyone watching, it looked like routine farm work. What we had created was a natural corridor that led directly to the center of the event, a path that passed by the barbecue pits and buffet tables that had been set up near where Margaret was still speaking. The portable toilets formed a barrier. The funnel would naturally direct any movement toward the VIP area. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The event continued, people chatting over champagne, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, waiters arranging elaborate food displays. Then thunder appeared on top of a small hill to the east of where the crowd had gathered. He stood there for a moment, massive and majestic, the sun glinting off his black fur. Standing over 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing over a ton, he was an imposing sight. Behind him, one by one, the rest of the herd emerged, a dozen bison in all, each weighing over a ton, their powerful shoulders creating a ripple of movement as they emerged from the tree line. From my vantage point, I could see the exact moment the first guests noticed them. A woman in a white linen dress, a glass of champagne in her hand, had a classic reaction. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Then someone shouted, "Is that a buffalo?" The whisper spread through the crowd like wildfire. People stood still, unsure whether this was part of the entertainment or cause for concern. I heard one man explain to his wife that it must have been a rustic touch designed for authenticity. Margaret was in the middle of announcing the charity raffle winners when she noticed the shift in the crowd's attention. She stopped mid-sentence, turning to look in the direction they were looking, just as thunder let out a deep roar that seemed to shake the air around us. The look on her face was priceless, shock giving way to confusion, then horror as she realized that these were not decorative animals kept safely behind a fence, but massive wild creatures moving with purpose, directly towards her precious event. "Security!" She yelled into the microphone, the sound echoing painfully through the crowd. "Stop those animals at once!" The two musclemen she'd hired looked at each other, then at the approaching herd of bison. One actually laughed. "Ma'am, I don't get paid enough to wrestle buffalo," he said, backing away. The chef at the Bison burger station was the first to really panic. Maybe it was guilt or maybe it was self-preservation, but he left his post with surprising speed, leaving behind a table full of partially prepared bison. Thunder headed straight for that table, drawn by the familiar scent. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, scrambling to get out of his way. He stopped at the abandoned grill, sniffing curiously at the prepared meat from one of his distant cousins. Margaret, still standing on the platform, was waving frantically for someone to do something. "This is intentional vandalism," she shouted. "Mr. Garrison has released dangerous animals into our community event. Call animal control. Call the sheriff." That's when Thunder decided to investigate the stage itself, perhaps drawn by the commotion. It moved forward with the unhurried confidence of a creature that feared nothing in its path. Margaret's moment seeing the 2,000-pound buffalo charging straight at her podium was a moment I will cherish forever. Her face went from rage to pure terror in an instant. She tried to block Thunder with her hands, her white button-down shirt flapping as she backed away. Dust clung to her dark jeans, and her hair flew as she turned and ran, screaming about lawsuits and criminal charges. Her husband wasn't far behind, tripping over the sound equipment in his haste and falling face down in the mud near the creek. The county commissioner and other VIPs rushed to their cars, their dignity forgotten. Meanwhile, the rest of the herd had discovered the buffet tables with exquisite precision that belied their massive size, sampling the gourmet fare, trampling over the fine china and crystal glasses, but clearly enjoying the organic salads and artisan breads that had been laid out for the guests. People scattered in all directions, abandoning their belongings in their haste to escape. Thunder, having lost interest in Margaret, was content to destroy the Bison burger station, knock over the grill, and scatter the pretentious signs that advertised the authentic wild game experience. I watched from the safety of my porch, making no move to intervene. These animals are not wild or dangerous unless provoked, and right now, they were simply doing what buffalo do, exploring and foraging. That they were doing it amid abandoned Louis Vuitton handbags and expensive sunglasses was only poetic justice. From her position near the dirt road where she had tried to block Thunder, Margaret was now shouting into the phone.